The topics and opinions expressed in the following show are solely those of the hosts and their guests and not those of W4CY Radio, its employees, or affiliates. We make no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our web. No liability, explicit or implied, shall be extended to W4CY Radio or its employees or affiliates. Any questions or comments should be directed to those show hosts. Thank you for choosing W4CY Radio.
Welcome to the Ask the Expert show on W4CY Radio and Talk4 TV, where we bring you educational information from top local experts in the fields of legal, health, financial, and home improvement. Now sit back and listen to experts in family law, association law, hearing loss, business brokers, home care, along with many other topics. Now here are your hosts, Steve-O and Sophia.
Hey, good afternoon. Welcome to another Ask the Expert show where we bring you the top experts in the field of legal, health, financial, and home improvement. Today is kind of a strange day. So our great expert is in California, our great producer is in Louisiana, and the host is in Florida. And we're just finding out because it doesn't get real cold in California. It's freezing there. Our producer said she rarely gets snow. It's snowing there. And even here in Florida, it's cold and rainy. So what's going on? I'm sure we got to blame it on Trump. Let me welcome you to our expert, our cold expert, attorney, Michael Mandelbrot. Good afternoon, Michael.
Steve, good to see you. Thank you for the introduction. I guess because we're sort of across the country, we can call it a nationwide podcast, right?
Yes.
Since we're across the country. And, you know, while we do have cold in California, I want to send my regards out to the people in Southern California,
yes,
who are still dealing with the impacts of these wildfires. It's really a tragedy out here in California that it hasn't been. We definitely can't blame that on Trump.
Yeah, right. Hey, Michael, let me ask you something about the fires, because we do a lot of Los Angeles shows, but I haven't had any since last night when I heard that there was new fires breaking out. They were close to Hollywood. Have you heard that?
Well, you know, what I have to wonder is, have the other fires been completely extinguished? I haven't heard of anything continuing to threaten structures. And again, it is hundreds of miles from us. So we are, I don't want to say the last to know, but we find out probably around the same time you guys do. The scary thing about it is it's these winds. If you've I think those of you who live where you have hurricanes, you've felt these 100-mile-an-hour winds before. We don't typically have them. But when you combine the dry brush with the 100-mile, 80-mile, 75-mile-an-hour winds, which we are having, and the fact that there is, I guess, a live fire going on, the risk is always tremendous. And, you know, it's scary. We just don't get a lot of rain in Southern California. We're sort of lucky in Northern California in that we do get that sort of morning dew that, you know, keeps the ground wet. You know, you drive around here, the hillsides are actually somewhat green. Southern California, brown as can be.
Michael, I got to tell you, Michael is, and he might not say this, but Michael is an expert when it comes to asbestos, cancer. And Michael, something really strange has happened, at least here in Florida. I'm on all the social medias, and what started this whole thing with you is we were getting people emailing us saying, how come you don't have a show about asbestos on? And we were so lucky to find Michael, who specializes in this area. But Michael, in the last, I would say 3 months, I have never seen so much advertising by attorneys for asbestos and mesothelioma. I don't understand what's going on. This has been around for a long time.
Well, I appreciate what you're saying. It's funny because I go to these conferences where all of these lawyers who advertise, and basically all the lawyers from the country typically go to one conference, and everyone goes and shakes everybody's hand. Hey, how's your practice going? How's everything going? Hey, nice to see you. Hey, if you ever need any help on that site, give me a call. But in reality, what's going on is that these lawyers are absolutely fighting tooth and nail to get these mesothelioma cases, because every mesothelioma cases, these lawyers who you see advertising on TV, they don't see these individuals as victims. They see them as dollar signs.
Okay.
Every client equals XXX millions of dollars, and that's all they see. The individual who has made probably more, well, I don't want to say more money, but hundreds of millions of dollars in this litigation is somebody by the name of James Sokolov. And he advertises nationwide and spends millions of dollars. He's never sat down once with a victim of mesothelioma, as far as I know. If you asked him the different asbestos products, I don't think he would know. But what he does is he just signs up the cases because he knows that they're going to be worth a lot of money, and then sends them off to different lawyers around the country, hoping that he gets a referral feedback. That's not what we do. We dig into every case. We meet every client. We fly out to meet every client. Like, as a matter of fact, we recently signed up a mesothelioma client who lives in Ireland. He worked his entire career in California, in the shipyards, but he was from Ireland. And in about, I think it was 1985, he decided to move back to Ireland. He was just diagnosed with mesothelioma caused by his exposure to asbestos while working in the shipyards in San Francisco, and working in construction sites in the Bay Area. And we fly out to go see that guy in Ireland. I mean, this is what we do. People with mesothelioma, they shouldn't be viewed as, dollar signs. They should be viewed as a victim whose life has been shortened by a tremendous disease. And the last thing that these people need to be doing is A, traveling, and B, worrying about a lawsuit. So we go out to meet them, and we try and make these cases as easy as possible on victims, because we don't want them to have to worry about their case. And the third thing that is very important to me, and I always like to say this, is I haven't sent out a bill in 30 years. Our cases are always handled on what's known as a contingency. And that means we have skin in the game. We are only successful if we are successful for our clients. And the more we make for our clients, the more we make as an office. And our goals are completely aligned with our clients to do the best possible work for them. But they're not viewed as dollar signs. They're viewed as victims who we've got to get recovery for. But sorry for the long-winded answer.
No, great answer.
It's all about money. It's all about money.
You do so much work for your clients before you even realize your first dollar, even if you do.
Absolutely. And that is true. And it may be 6 months to a year where we have to, pay for depositions, pay to have the case filed and served. We might spend $50,000 to $100,000, hire, retain experts before we see a dollar. It's very rare that any client with mesothelioma has $50,000 to $100,000 to spend on a lawsuit, while these are mostly people from lower socioeconomic backgrounds. Unfortunately, asbestos diseases can strike anybody, but generally it's the blue collar worker who was working day to day around asbestos. And these are people who need our help. They're not from affluent backgrounds. They didn't go typically to private schools. These are military people, and people who spent their years working construction out of unions, shipyards, power plants. And these are people who really need our help. And so, yeah,
Michael, there's something else that I'm going to bring up because it's so important. Folks, there's a lot of attorneys out there that tell you they specialize in this area. And I'm going to tell you, anybody can put a shingle up and say they specialize in that area. But Michael, truly, this is all he does. He specializes in this area. How long have you been doing this for, Michael?
This will be my 30th year. And I will say I started in this field before I even graduated from, after I graduated from law school, but before I had gotten my bar results. So you graduate from law school, take the bar. I took it for the first time, and while I was awaiting my results, I began working for a firm who handled these cases 30 years ago. And I did, of course, pass the bar the first time, so I immediately became a lawyer in this field, working and helping victims of asbestos diseases. And, you mentioned the word expert. I don't think we're allowed to call ourselves.
You're not, I am.
You might, but if there is a specialty that I have, a focus, this is my entire career. I don't do wills and trusts. I don't do car accidents. I help victims of mesothelioma, lung cancer, and asbestosis. And that's what I do. These other lawyers, you'll see they're out on TV, and if you look at their website, they're also doing pharmaceutical cases and cigarette cases and all of these other cases. This is it. This is the Asbestos Legal Center, not the Everything Legal Center.
Exactly. Michael, it's funny. Every time I see the movie Aaron Brockovich, I think about you, because that's kind of what you do.
Absolutely. These companies concealed the hazards of asbestos despite the fact they had irrefutable evidence that exposure to asbestos caused mesothelioma. And not only did they continue to sell the products for years and mine it, and it went into hundreds of products, they didn't even put a warning on the label for like 40 years. I mean, can't you put a warning on that says, caution, wear a mask, caution, avoid breathing dust, may cause cancer. And when you look at what they actually knew, it goes back to, I believe it's the 1930s. We're almost on 100 years, where the insurance companies for the big asbestos companies, MetLife, they tested workers for Johns Manville, and they tested workers for other asbestos companies. And what did they find? A high incidence of cancer, a very rare cancer known as mesothelioma. And what did they do? they just pulled out the eraser and changed the results of the study, saying that they saw a high incidence of another disease known as silicosis, which is caused by sand. And they basically deceived the public for 50 years, couldn't even put a warning label on it, and it was all about big business and money. So it is very much like Aaron Brockovich. And, a cancer caused to a large number of people by companies that knew their products were causing cancer, and instead of just doing the right thing, they concealed the hazards so that thousands and thousands of additional people, and in the case of asbestos, maybe millions, would get sick. And it's just really unfortunate. And you hear about lawyers when you're young, and how watch out for lawyers. I feel that I'm lucky to have fallen into this field. I can't imagine what it would be like defending these asbestos companies and billing, every minute, every time they pick up the phone, billing these asbestos companies to defend them. I don't want to liken it to being a defense lawyer defending a murderer, but, in some ways, you have to ask yourself, morally, is it something I could do? And morally, it's definitely something I could not do, would be defending these companies. So I feel very lucky that I fell into this field, and it has become something that I'm very passionate about. So thank you.
Michael, we just got our first text in from Malibu. Speaking of the fires, I'm really enjoying, this is the second time I've listened to your show. I'm really enjoying you speak. I'm very nervous for friends of mine who've lost their homes, that are older homes, and I know that there's got to be a problem now with the soil and the air. Do these people have, I don't know what word, do these people have something towards asbestos, being the homes are so old?
Well, it's sort of, I guess there's a few layers to that question, because, the first thing is about the concern and safety of all the people who were impacted by the fires. Then I guess maybe the second thing is some type of recovery and cleanup. And there is definitely a large concern for me that in any of that cleanup, like in 9/11, for example, there's a tremendous amount of asbestos, because many of those homes there were built before 1980 and would have had asbestos in them.
Right.
And so there is no doubt that in the cleanup, there is going to have to be remedial measures taken and abatement, and a lot of soil testing done to ensure that there are safe, that the soil is safe. I would absolutely be concerned. I mean, these fires you mentioned, it's the soil, but we also talk about, all the steps that we take in California to emit less greenhouse gases and to do our part. But when we have, like, for example, the fires that we had, I believe 7-8 years ago in the North Bay, they estimated that wiped out those fires wiped out 18 years of California's greenhouse gas emission savings. And so this fire, I'm sure, has done a lot of damage there as well. And so there's so many layers. You look at the soil, I would be concerned, but no doubt before anybody can rebuild. A geologist is going to have to get out there and test the soil, not just for asbestos, but I'm sure other contaminants and fumes. Like, who knows what could have leaked into the soil? You know, what exploded during that fire? What leaked into the, we just don't know. And
Right.
it's such a scary thing. You know, let's one step at a time. Safety first, cleanup and recovery two, and then we'll go to the soil three. I guess let's take it one step
Michael,
at a time.
this show is national. And, you know, I just read there's still problems in Ohio from the train wreck, and that people are still saying there's a lot of chemicals that are still in the ground and in the water. Could any of those be asbestos related?
Well, I would say that I doubt it. Um, you know, we've had a lot of problems here in the Bay Area too with chemicals leaching into soil. And, you know, asbestos is something that is mined. It is a fiber, something like dusty. Think if you took like a handful of flour and threw it up in the air. I'm going to mention something I saw. And you saw it sort of float. All those pieces you didn't see floating down, that's like what asbestos was like. It was a fiber that was so fine that it was invisible to the human eye, unless, you know, some light struck it. You hear about people seeing these shiny fibers. For ground, I get more concerned about chemicals leaking into the ground. Like, so say that train in Pennsylvania was carrying some toxic chemicals, it flips over, all these chemicals then leak into the ground. How do you get those out of the ground? And then do they get into the vegetation? Do they get into the groundwater? You know, those are questions you can't answer. With asbestos, it being a fiber and not leaking into the ground, I would doubt it in Pennsylvania. For asbestos, it's more something like you can go onto a ship in an engine room right now, and there's asbestos floating around in there that was probably floating around 20 years ago in that engine room. It's more something floating in the air than in the ground, is what I would say. But it, you know, it's really a concern. And the similarity is that in 20 years, they're still going to be worried about their groundwater. And it's the same thing with asbestos. You know, you could have been exposed 20 years ago and never had a symptom, never had a problem, and it can come up 25, 30, 40 years later. And that's what makes it, you know, one of the tougher things to deal with. As I've mentioned, any home built before 1975, I would bet that it's got asbestos in it in some form. Popcorn ceilings, drywall, roofing materials, vinyl linoleum tiles, you know, like in bathrooms and in laundry rooms, for example, you would see the 8x8 or the 9x9 little tiles. All of those had asbestos in them. And they were used in most homes built. And, you know, you don't want to put any silver lining on a fire that has impacted so many people and cost so much money. But in a lot of ways, it does get rid of a problem that you couldn't have gotten rid of before. And that is these homes with asbestos without tearing them down or spending hundreds of thousands of dollars to abate them. At least now, homes can be constructed in these areas with materials that are safe for the occupants. Where any home built before 1975, they didn't have them because they had asbestos in them.
Michael, what about these people who deal in popcorn cleanup? People want to get rid of their popcorn ceiling. Are they could they have any I don't know, the asbestos problems down the road?
100%, there's no doubt about it. Anybody who lived in these homes, and most of us did, we remember those popcorn ceilings. And,
Yes.
I always laugh because as my brother and I think we were like 10, 11 years old. And back then, I think it was 9-foot ceilings, 8-foot ceilings. You could jump and touch the ceiling and the dust
Yes.
would rain. And so if he would be sitting down, I would try and jump and touch the ceiling so it rained, and he would do the same thing to me as like a little joke and stuff.
Yes.
And so these homes are everywhere. You got two choices: encapsulate it, meaning put like a coating over it so it's not dusty. If I jumped up and rubbed it, nothing's going to come down. They've got special like seals that can go over it, a less expensive solution. Or you've got the more expensive solution. You've got to abate it. And that would involve, hiring licensed contractors. And really what it involves is, completely sealing off the room, using wet down procedures before you remove it so it doesn't become dusty, meaning make it real wet so it comes off like a mud almost instead of in a powder form. Obviously, using protective clothing throughout your body as well as a mask. And then when the job is complete, you've got to glove bag all of your clothing, discard your clothing so that it is, there could be no exposure from your clothing, and then have to perform this sealed cleanup. It's very expensive. I have a friend who didn't want to pay the money, and so he read up on it, and he literally did all of those things I mentioned. He sprayed it down, he wore the suit, he put it all in a bag when he was done and then sealed it. He took it to the dump. He just didn't take it to any dump. He took it to the hazardous materials dump, and he did everything right, even though he wasn't licensed. I think that's rare. Don't be that person. My only advice would be don't be that person, I guess, like him. It's not an easy thing to take down. And, you've got your family involved. The dust stays in the air forever. Even if you leave the house for a week, that dust is still in there.
Wow.
It's not like it could be removed without special vacuums and other things. So, I'd say encapsulate to save money, or just accept the fact that you're going to have it in your home unless you want to spend a lot of money to get it removed.
Here's a text from Greg. He said, I am surprised that there is not more shows like this. Thank you for bringing this to our attention. I have a mold and mildew removal company. Am I at risk?
Well, sure. I mean, as I've seen, mold is typically in drywall, joint compound areas that get wet. But, one of the things they do when they remove the mold or abate it is they've got to cut into the drywall, cut into the ceiling, cut into the area where the mold is and remove it. That cutting and could obviously has the potential of cutting into asbestos, whether it's in drywall, joint compound, roofing materials, flooring. And I'm interested in knowing more from his experience where he has seen a high incidence of the mold in building products in homes, like where he sees it. But from my experience, it's, like bathrooms and stuff. And so what are the walls made of? Drywall. If the home was built before 1980, sure, there is a great potential for exposure.
Michael's phone number is 415-895-5175. If you're watching this on YouTube, we're running his website and phone number. If, like most of you listen on iHeart or on radio, again, it's 415-895-5175. Michael, people don't realize that if you go to fight this, these insurance companies have the top law firms representing them, don't they?
They do. They do. All the big firms that you hear about, these Morgan, Lewis, and Bacchius, and Steptoe and Johnson, a lot of them have, I don't know what they call it, an insurance arm where you're going, these insurance companies always hire some of the top lawyers to fight these cases. And, to me, it's very unfortunate, because if you look at the billions and billions of dollars that has been paid out by insurance companies as a result of these cases, about 50% of that money, and again, I'm biased, I think it should all go to victims, but 50% of, say, that $50 billion that has been paid out has gone to defense lawyers to defend these cases.
Wow.
And so, if your client gets, say, $5 million or $3 million in recovery in a case, you can bet that the law firms on the other end collectively build at least that much. When we're filing a case in the next couple of weeks, or actually one this Friday and one in the next couple of weeks. And we've got to sue 30 defendants, say, on average in these cases, about 30 companies. And so each one of them has to then hire an insurance, the insurance company then has to hire a law firm, and each one of them probably charges at least $10,000, $20,000, $30,000 just to open the file, review the complaint, and answer the complaint. Then they've got to attend depositions for, a week. They can't just all hire the same lawyer, God forbid. We all need our own lawyer to represent our interests. And so I think my record at a deposition was me, my client, the court reporter, and 54 defense lawyers out in the room, all representing different companies. This was before a lot of these companies went bankrupt, but literally, and we weren't even local for that. So that means in this deposition, I remember, went weeks. His name was Robert Silva. He was a boiler worker for like 30 years. And so these lawyers literally for weeks got to not only bill their client for food and meals and per diems, but also for their hourlies and defending the deposition. And 98% of the time in that deposition, the lawyers really weren't doing anything. They only asked questions for like 5 minutes each, 10 minutes each, and one of them takes lead for the entire time. So the millions of dollars spent in these cases by insurance companies is staggering. And it's in every asbestos case. And again, I just think that money should go to victims. Of course, they can't just say, oh, you're right, you should have sued us, here's $1 million. But I will say over time, there has been defendants who can look at a case, look at the exposure that we've claimed and say, they have a good case against us. We're going to come to you and settle very early in the case, as opposed to spending millions of dollars on lawyers and then settling with you.
How often does that happen, Michael?
It's a good question. Not as often as I'd like, because the goal of these lawyers, these high-profile law firms on the other end, because they've got to get their billable hours in,
Right.
Their yearly requirement at their big firm, you've got to get 2,000 hours. And if you do that for a few years, you'll be up to a senior associate, and then you can make partner after 7 years. So they got to get their hours in. The goal of these defense lawyers in most of these cases, is to bill it as long as they can up until trial, and then right before trial, settle it. So they've made as much money as they can for their firm, handling it on the defense, and then looking like a hero to their client because they settled it right before trial. When in reality, if they came to us early in the case with a reasonable number to settle, we would settle that case very early on behalf of our clients. And it's unfortunate. I think it's almost a conflict of interest. Who's your duty to? Your law firm to bill 2,000 hours, or to your client to save them money in this case? And as I've seen with many lawyers, there's one who is now retired, but his name was Stephen Snyder, Stephen. He was the managing partner of a now bankrupt law firm, Brobeck, Flegler, and Harrison. They were national counsel to an insulation company known as Fiberboard, who were named in thousands of cases around the country. And without question, I think that their lawyer, Stephen Snyder, who worked at the big law firm Brobeck as the managing partner, he bankrupted his own client by billing them so much in his cases instead of settling them. Without question. You had your own lawyer bankrupting this billion-dollar client, having to make his hours for all his office in Philadelphia and his office in New York and his office here that he had to continue to maintain. And what happened when Fiberboard finally went bankrupt? Brobeck went bankrupt.
Yes.
Because that was it. That was it. And so there was no, he didn't have any other clients. And so he saw their money as his money, not victims' money. And it was very unfortunate. I am ecstatic that lawyer is no longer involved in asbestos. I could go on about how he also, which was a conflict, I will say real quick, after they went bankrupt, which is he became a trustee of an asbestos trust. The Department of Justice prohibits that, but he did it anyways. And his fee,
conflict of interest, right?
Yeah, it's a conflict, exactly. And his fee on that asbestos trust, so now he's working with asbestos lawyers, was $30 million when the asbestos trust got confirmed. And I've got the article that said that $30 million was going to pay off his old law firm, Brobeck's, debts, because they probably had leases on all their offices and, in all these places. And when that first asbestos company went bankrupt, Brobeck was stuck, with all of these leases and all of these debts. And the fact that this $30 million went to him to pay off his debts, and that money 100% should have went to asbestos victims. It was criminal. It was criminal. But it's unfortunate because the Department of Justice hasn't done anything about it. But lo and behold, I am very optimistic that our new administration will start taking a look at some of the plaintiffs' lawyers and the defense lawyers who have been misappropriating money from asbestos victims, because I think they are aware of it.
Michael, do you ever get a client that tried to handle this themselves and then they realized they were way over their head and they came to you?
Yeah, well, what we see is because all of these asbestos trust funds are online. So any client can file a trust claim if they are sick. And what we see a lot is, clients say, hey, I don't want to deal with a lawyer. I can just file this claim myself. They file it and it comes back deficient. And they're like, oh, what do I do now? How am I going to fix this claim? And then they call us and we might say, well, you don't only have this claim, you also have this claim, this claim, this claim, this case, this, and you can sue this defendant. That's what we typically see. The other thing, and this is one of the unfortunate things, and this goes back to the TV ads that you talked about, we might often see what we call a second case. Say somebody is diagnosed in California, but they respond to one of those national TV ads and the lawyer is in Madison County, Illinois. So that lawyer says, hey, I would love to take your case. And instead of filing it where it should be in California, they file that case in Madison County, Illinois. Well, then that victim dies and it becomes a wrongful death case. So the new client is the children and the spouse. And the children and the spouse say, hey, wait a minute. Why did my case go out to Madison County, Illinois? I don't want to hire that firm who took my case out there. We should have had a firm in California. And then they call me and I say, well, I don't know why your case was ever taken out of California when all the exposure was in California. But that's what these national firms will do, just, to make a buck for their office. But it's really detrimental to clients because all of the money in their case is in California defendants. So that is what we often see, or I would say see quite frequently, is heirs of somebody who died of mesothelioma in California, whose case was taken by one of these national offices to New York, to Madison County, to Florida, who realized, hey, look, these guys didn't do anything in our case while they were alive. They're clearly not going to do a lot now that they're deceased. This case should be in California. And they basically don't hire the firm that their mom or their dad hired who had mesothelioma, or their spouse hired who had mesothelioma, and they hire me. And then we've got to handle it as what we call a second case. We can't sue anybody they've settled with or gone after. But as long as the statute hasn't run, we've got local companies we can sue and get them some recovery. Companies, these firms who do the national advertising and sign up all these cases, they don't even know about them because they don't practice here. So they don't know about these defendants who we name and have litigated against for 30 years. They just go after their national companies. For example, Union Carbide is a big defendant in our cases and in their cases. But then you've got local suppliers, manufacturers, contractors. They have no clue who they are, and they can't get jurisdiction over them in Madison County anyways, so they wouldn't name them. And it's unfortunate. But that's what we really see a lot of, is what I would call a second case for somebody whose case was mishandled by their prior lawyer.
So people really need to be very aware on the firm they hire. And I think that's what's so great about a show like this, Michael, is that there's so many people who are uneducated. And, one of the things I wanted to get in is, at a minimum, what's needed to file an asbestos lawsuit or claim?
Diagnosis of an asbestos disease. That would be what I would say. We'll worry about the exposure to asbestos. We'll figure out how somebody got the disease. but the minimum that is required is a diagnosis of an asbestos-related disease. What you hear about is mesothelioma, though that's a cancer to the lining of the lung. That one, I don't want to say it's easy to diagnose because it's such a rare cancer, but if somebody has a biopsy done and then there is a pathology report, that is a diagnosis. If the pathology report diagnoses them with mesothelioma, it's fairly clean. Then we've got lung cancer. To file for somebody who has lung cancer, we first need a diagnosis of lung cancer, but then we also have to get a copy of their x-ray to make sure they have underlying asbestos scarring or disease on their lungs. That is very important. Somebody has lung cancer, but no asbestos scarring, it is very difficult to bring a case for them. Those are people whose lung cancer would be looked at by defense lawyers and probably by us as being caused by something else, and usually in that case, it would be smoking. Now, if somebody did smoke and has lung cancer, it doesn't preclude them from having a case. We're just looking for that underlying asbestos disease. 95% of the lung cancer cases I've represented, those individuals smoked in the past. It doesn't preclude them from getting an asbestos disease. So then you've got mesothelioma, you've got lung cancer, then we've got what we call other cancers. Same thing, we need a pathology report of one of these other cancers. It would be intestinal cancer, colorectal cancer, in some cases bladder cancer as well, but also that underlying scarring on the lungs caused by asbestos. In those cases, we can potentially bring a lawsuit as well. The ones that the disease that gets diagnosed the most, but unfortunately very few lawyers will file and help these victims, is a disease known as asbestosis. It's also a terminal disease. And basically what happens is over time, people essentially suffocate because their lungs don't work anymore. It is not a cancer though, and oftentimes it is a very slow developing disease. If somebody has asbestosis, it is a compensable disease. We can get them compensation, but 98% of the lawyers around the country, they don't want to touch those cases because there's not as much money in them and there is a lot more work. So asbestosis is an asbestos disease. At a minimum, we need a diagnosis, and it starts with an x-ray or a CT scan, which we pay for, sent to our expert to review for an asbestos disease. Then we can get to the asbestos exposure, how somebody was exposed as a step 2. But step 1, diagnosis of an asbestos-related disease or cancer at a minimum.
You know, Michael, what I love about what you do, you make it so easy to understand. So think of yourself, if I'm a client, you know what, I want a lawyer who I want to be able to understand everything he says. I don't have to write you a check when I come in to see you. And you are so well versed on this that you're going to give a person the right information.
Well, you know, I appreciate that, but you said something there. They don't even have to come in to see me.
Yeah, right.
I'll go see them. You know, you want to meet at a local restaurant. If somebody's got an asbestos disease, come out and see you. I'll pay for it. It's fine. I want to be able to help people. I worry that, unfortunately, as I've seen throughout my career, local physicians are really not educated on asbestos-related diseases. And if somebody is diagnosed, if somebody has breathing problems, and especially if somebody has lung cancer, the first thing every local doctor I've ever seen will point to is cigarette smoking. Did you smoke cigarettes? They rarely even ask about asbestos. Now, if someone has mesothelioma, of course they're going to ask about asbestos. But if they have lung cancer, any pathologist locally, they're typically going to say, well, did he smoke cigarettes? That's what caused it. But that's not the case. It's not
Michael,
always.
we have less than a minute. Tell people how they can reach you.
1-800-970-DUST, toll-free number is my call center. Mesothelioma.pro is my website. Reach out to me anytime. And you know what? I'll be unique. Direct my mobile phone, 415-307-2119.
And Michael, this show is going to replay in 2 weeks. We are so glad we've got you, Michael. We'll see you again next month, but this show will replay in 2 weeks. So thanks for tuning in, Michael. We enjoyed you, and we'll see you soon.
I really appreciate it, as always, Steve, and I look forward to it again in about a month.
That's our great attorney, Michael Mandelbrot, and that'll do it for us today. We'll be back again with you next week with more Ask the Experts.
Thanks for tuning in today to the Ask the Experts show on W4CY Radio and Talk4 TV. Tune in next week and every week to hear more from our experts on personal injury, insurance, air condition repairs, estate planning, Medicare, and many other topics in the areas of legal, health, financial, and home improvement. See you next week.